In the daily grind of modern relationships, many men keep pushing forward even when the signs are clear that their effort isn't being met. They send the next message, make the next plan, and hold on hoping things will change. This isn't about one big moment of rejection. It's the slow accumulation of small disappointments that wear down their focus and energy over weeks and months. The quiet realization hits that they're giving away pieces of themselves without getting anything solid in return. This pattern creates an inner conflict that Stoicism directly confronts by reminding us that our peace depends on what we choose to value and what we decide to release. If these words are hitting home, take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the practical Stoic tools that can change how you show up in life. Number 1. The power of self-control and letting go. When a man chooses to walk away from a situation that demands constant chasing, he exercises the exact form of self-control Epictetus described as the only true freedom available to any human being. He stops treating his time and attention as something that must be earned by another person's inconsistent responses. Instead, he treats them as his own sovereign property, something no external outcome can touch. This decision is not driven by anger or revenge. It comes from a calm assessment that continuing the pursuit would hand over his inner state to forces he cannot command. In doing so, he reclaims the one domain Stoicism insists is always under our power, our judgments and our actions. Women notice this shift not because of any grand speech, but because the man suddenly carries himself with a steadiness that was missing before. His presence no longer broadcasts quiet desperation. It broadcasts a man who has decided his own standards matter more than any temporary connection. This act of walking away also breaks the invisible contract many men unconsciously sign when they keep investing without reciprocity. Stoic philosophy calls this contract a form of slavery to externals, and it quietly erodes a man's dignity long before anyone else sees the damage. By stepping back, he refuses to let another person's moods or silences dictate his daily emotional weather. The respect that follows is not manufactured or gained. It arises naturally because a woman now encounters someone who values his own peace enough to protect it. She sees a man who is not waiting for her approval to feel complete. That observation lands deeper than any compliment or gesture ever could, because it is rooted in observable behavior rather than words. Over time, this consistency proves more compelling than endless availability ever did. Practical application begins with a simple daily practice Marcus Aurelius would have recognized. Review your interactions at the end of each day and ask whether they serve your virtue or merely fed an attachment. If the honest answer is the latter, the next step is to create distance without explanation or drama. The space you create is not a tactic. It is the logical outcome of choosing self-mastery over emotional dependency. Women who previously took your presence for granted often register the absence as a signal that something of real substance has been removed from their orbit. Respect grows in that vacuum because it is the only honest response to a man who refuses to diminish himself for anyone. The long-term effect is a life that no longer revolves around waiting for texts, interpreting mixed signals, or adjusting plans around someone else's convenience. Stoicism teaches that such a life is the only one worth living because it keeps the mind clear for what actually matters: reason, duty, and personal growth. When a man lives this way, he stops appearing as someone who needs to be managed or placated. He appears as someone who manages himself. That shift is quietly registered by women who have grown accustomed to men who stay too long and give too much without any corresponding commitment from their side. The respect is secret only because it is rarely voiced out loud. It is felt as a new level of regard that was absent when the pursuit was constant. Walking away also trains the man himself to recognize his own worth without needing confirmation from outside. Seneca wrote that the greatest riches come from wanting less, and this principle applies directly to romantic attention. By wanting less of what is not freely given, the man discovers he already possesses everything required for a dignified existence. Women sense this internal richness because it cannot be faked. It shows in relaxed posture, in conversations that are no longer laced with subtle pleading, and in decisions that put personal integrity first. The respect they feel is the natural human response to witnessing someone who has aligned his actions with his deepest principles rather than with fleeting desires. Finally, this outline closes the loop on the original struggle. The quiet frustration of one-sided effort dissolves when self-control becomes the default setting. The man no longer wakes up wondering what he did wrong or what he could do next. He wakes up knowing his path is his own. That knowledge radiates outward and creates the very respect the title points toward, not as a goal to chase, but as the byproduct of a Stoic life properly lived. Number 2. Why clinging diminishes your worth in her eyes. Clinging, no matter how polite or persistent it appears, signals to any observant person that a man's sense of worth is located outside himself. Stoicism names this error a fundamental misjudgment, placing the good in things we do not control. When a man keeps reaching out despite clear disinterest, he is essentially announcing that another person's attention is required for him to feel whole. Women register this on a level that rarely reaches conscious discussion, yet it quietly lowers the regard they hold for him. The man who walks away reverses that signal. He demonstrates that his wholeness was never in question and that he will not bargain it away for scraps of connection. This reversal matters because modern dating often rewards persistence that borders on self-erasure. The Stoic response is to reject that reward system entirely. By walking away, the man refuses to participate in a dynamic that treats his time as cheap and his boundaries as optional. He reasserts that his energy belongs first to his own character and responsibilities. The respect women develop in response is not pity or guilt. It is the recognition that they are now dealing with someone who cannot be taken for granted. That recognition carries weight precisely because it is rare. Most men stay in the pattern hoping for a change that never arrives. The one who leaves shows he understands something deeper about human value. In practice, this means noticing the moment when effort becomes one-sided and choosing silence instead of another attempt to re-engage. The silence is not cold or manipulative. It is the clean consequence of a man who has weighed the situation against the Stoic standards and found it wanting. Women who once saw constant availability begin to see deliberate absence. The contrast forces a reassessment. They start to wonder why this man no longer orbits their schedule, and the wondering itself plants the seed of respect. Stoicism calls this outcome the fruit of right reason, actions aligned with truth rather than hope. The deeper layer is that clinging also exhausts the man's own capacity for joy and contribution elsewhere in life. Every hour spent analyzing mixed signals is an hour not spent reading, building, or simply resting in his own company. Walking away frees that hour and returns it to its rightful owner. The restored energy shows in clearer thinking and steadier presence. Women notice the difference even if they never hear the internal reasoning. They encounter a man who seems more grounded, less reactive, and therefore more substantial. Respect follows as the only fitting response to observed strength. Over months, the pattern compounds. The man who once chased now moves through his days with purpose that does not depend on romantic validation. This independence is not arrogance. It is the Stoic ideal of living according to nature, where nature includes the rational acceptance that not every connection is meant to be forced. Women who observe this shift often feel a subtle pull toward the very man who no longer needs their approval. The respect is secret because it is experienced as an internal shift rather than a public declaration, yet it is real and lasting. This outline ends where it began. Clinging diminishes worth because it hands power to externals. Walking away restores that power to the only place it belongs, inside the man himself. The respect women feel is simply the mirror of that restored power reflected back at them. Number 3, building unbreakable inner strength by walking away. Inner strength in Stoic terms is not toughness for its own sake. It is the steady refusal to let circumstances dictate your emotional state. When a man walks away from an unbalanced dynamic, he practices this refusal in the most practical arena possible, his closest relationships. He chooses to bear the temporary discomfort of distance rather than the ongoing discomfort of self-betrayal. That single choice, repeated when necessary, forges a resilience that no amount of positive thinking alone can create. Women sense this resilience as a form of quiet power that stands apart from the usual displays of confidence they encounter. The process is gradual and invisible at first. The man stops checking his phone for replies that never come. He redirects the mental energy into work, study, or physical training. Seneca would call this converting potential vice into virtue. The result is a man whose mood no longer rises and falls with another person's whims. This emotional independence registers as strength because it is so uncommon. Most people remain tethered to the validation of those they desire. The man who detaches proves he has learned to stand on his own foundation. Practical steps include setting a clear internal rule. If effort is not matched within a reasonable window, the interaction ends without negotiation. The rule is applied calmly, not as punishment, but as self-protection. Over time, the man discovers he needs fewer external reassurances than he once believed. His conversations become lighter, his plans more his own, and his overall demeanor less anxious. Women who previously experienced him as eager now experience him as self-possessed. The respect they develop is the natural human response to witnessing someone who has grown beyond the need to perform for approval. This inner strength also protects against future disappointment. Because the man has practiced walking away once, he knows he can do it again if required. That knowledge removes the fear that often keeps people trapped in mediocre situations. Without that fear, he can enter new interactions with genuine openness rather than hidden desperation. Women feel the difference immediately. They're no longer dealing with someone who is trying to win them over at all costs. They are dealing with someone who is simply living his life and inviting them to join if they choose. The invitation carries far more weight. Long-term, the practice builds a reputation, even unspoken, of a man who cannot be controlled by emotional leverage. Stoicism teaches that such a reputation is worth more than any temporary romantic gain. Women who once took the man's attention lightly now regard him with a new level of seriousness. The respect is not dramatic. It shows in small things: longer eye contact, more thoughtful questions, a reluctance to let conversations end quickly. These signs confirm that the inner work has produced an outer presence that commands attention without demanding it. This outline demonstrates that walking away is not loss. It is the deliberate construction of a character that no relationship can diminish. The respect women feel is the recognition that they stand before a man who has already made himself whole. Number 4. The silent message or actions send about your value. Actions always speak louder than any explanation, and the act of walking away sends one of the clearest messages possible. I value myself enough to leave when the terms are not right. Stoicism insists that we teach others how to treat us by the standards we accept or reject. When a man stops accepting half measures, he teaches exactly that lesson without saying a word. The silence itself becomes the teacher. Women receive the lesson on a level that bypasses argument and lands directly in their perception of his character. The message is received because it contrasts sharply with the behavior of men who stay and adapt endlessly. Those men unintentionally communicate that their standards are flexible and their self-regard negotiable. The man who walks away communicates the opposite. His departure is not theatrical. It is measured and final. This measured finality carries dignity that cannot be manufactured. It tells any observer that the man has weighed the situation against his principles and found it lacking. Respect follows because principles held at personal cost are the rarest form of integrity. In daily life, the practice looks like this. Notice the pattern. Decide the threshold has been crossed, and then simply cease initiation. No final text, no explanation, no slow fade that keeps hope alive. The clean break is what makes the message unmistakable. Women who previously enjoyed the attention without matching it now face its absence. The absence forces reflection. They begin to see the man not as someone who was always available, but as someone who chose to stop being available. That choice reframes him in their mind from ordinary to exceptional. Stoic wisdom adds that the value we place on ourselves is the only value we can truly control. By acting on that value, the man aligns his behavior with his philosophy. The alignment produces a calm certainty that others feel even in brief encounters. Conversations become more direct, eye contact steadier, and presence more commanding. Women register these shifts as signs of a man who knows his own worth and does not need to prove it through persistence. The respect is the inevitable outcome of consistent, quiet self-valuation. Over time, this silent message compounds across all areas of life. Friends, colleagues, and potential partners alike begin to treat the man with greater deference because his actions have shown he will not tolerate being undervalued. The original romantic context becomes just one more arena where the principle has been tested and proven. The respect women feel is therefore not isolated. It is part of a larger pattern of regard that follows a man who lives by Stoic standards. This outline reveals that walking away is never silent in its effect. It speaks volumes about the man's internal compass and invites others to calibrate their own behavior accordingly. Number 5. How this choice leads to deeper, more respectful bonds. When a man walks away from what is not working, he creates the exact conditions for something better to enter his life. Stoicism views this as living according to nature, releasing what does not serve virtue, so that space remains for what does. The respect women develop in the wake of his departure is often the first step toward a bond built on mutual regard rather than one-sided effort. Because he has shown he will not settle, any future connection must meet a higher standard from the start. The deeper bond forms because both parties now understand the rules. The man has demonstrated he will leave if respect is absent, and the woman who returns does so with eyes open. There is no hidden testing, no slow erosion of boundaries. The relationship begins with clear value on both sides. Stoic friendship, extended to romance, requires a quality of effort and honesty of character. Walking away enforces that requirement before any formal commitment is made. Practical wisdom here means entering new interactions without the baggage of past chasing. The man brings a lighter energy, free from the need to impress or overcompensate. Women respond to this lightness with their own authenticity. Conversations flow more naturally, plans are made with mutual enthusiasm, and small acts of consideration appear without prompting. The respect that was born when he walked away becomes the foundation that keeps the new bond stable. This choice also protects the man from repeating old patterns. Because he has practiced detachment, he can now enjoy closeness without becoming consumed by it. He participates fully, yet retains the ability to step back if the balance shifts. Women sense this balanced participation as rare maturity. It allows them to relax into the relationship rather than manage it. The result is a connection that feels chosen by both rather than endured by one. In the end, the Stoic man discovers that walking away was never about rejection of others. It was about loyalty to his own standards. The respect that follows, and the deeper bonds that grow from it, are simply the natural consequences of a life ordered by reason. Women who witness this order often find themselves wanting to be part of it, not because the man pursued them harder, but because he proved he would never pursue them at the cost of his soul. Number 6. Reclaiming your time as the ultimate act of self-respect. In modern life, a man's time is constantly pulled in every direction, especially in relationships where one person gives freely while the other responds only when convenient. Choosing to walk away is the deliberate decision to stop donating hours, days, and mental energy to a dynamic that returns nothing of real value. Stoicism teaches that time is the one resource we cannot recover, and guarding it fiercely is a core duty to ourselves. When a man stops investing in unbalanced effort, he reclaims the hours that were quietly leaking away. This reclamation is felt immediately in clearer thinking and restored focus. Women notice the change because the man who once filled their space with constant attention suddenly becomes unavailable, and that absence highlights how much of his life he had been offering without return. By walking away, the man sends a quiet but unmistakable declaration that his days belong to his own purpose first. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily to focus on what is essential and to let go of what is not. Applying that principle here means refusing to let another person's inconsistent interest become the center of his schedule. The free time goes into work that matters, into self-improvement, or simply into quiet reflection. This redirection builds a life of substance rather than one defined by waiting. Women who previously saw him as always reachable now see someone whose time has clear boundaries. That boundary itself generates respect because it shows a man who understands the finite nature of his own existence and refuses to waste it. The practical step is straightforward. Once the pattern of one-sided effort is recognized, further initiation stops completely. No slow withdrawal, no occasional check-ins. The cut is clean, so the time reclaimed is truly free. In the weeks that follow, the man experiences a noticeable lift in his daily energy because his mind is no longer occupied with decoding mixed signals or planning the next move. This mental clarity translates into stronger presence in every other area of life. Women sense the difference, even from a distance. They encounter a man who moves through his world with purpose rather than with the subtle tension of someone still hoping for a reply. Respect grows from the observation that he has chosen his own life over the uncertainty they offered. Stoicism emphasizes that we are harmed not by external events, but by our own judgments about them. Walking away is the judgment that continued pursuit is beneath a rational man. By making that judgment consistently, the man protects his inner citadel from unnecessary disturbance. The respect women develop is not based on longing or regret alone. It stems from recognizing that they are now facing someone whose inner world is no longer easily disrupted by their actions or inactions. This undisturbed state is rare and therefore commanding. It shifts how they perceive his overall value without any need for explanation. Over months, the reclaimed time compounds into visible growth. The man becomes more capable, more knowledgeable, and more at peace in his own company. These improvements are impossible to hide. Women who once took his attention lightly begin to see him as someone who has used his freedom wisely. The respect they feel is the acknowledgement that his choice to walk away was not a loss, but an investment in himself that has clearly paid off. It becomes harder for them to view him as just another man who is willing to wait indefinitely. This outline shows that walking away is never empty. It is the active reclamation of a man's most precious resource, his time, and a quiet proof that he values his own life enough to protect it. The respect that follows is the natural response to witnessing someone who has stopped squandering what cannot be replaced. Number 7. The Stoic virtue of temperance in romantic pursuit. Temperance, one of the 4 cardinal virtues in Stoicism, is the practiced ability to desire only what is appropriate and to restrain impulses that lead to excess. In relationships, this virtue appears when a man refuses to chase beyond what is reasonable or reciprocated. Walking away is temperance in action, the calm recognition that more pursuit would cross into self-indulgent neediness rather than virtuous effort. By exercising this restraint, the man avoids the common trap of turning attraction into obsession. Women register the restraint as strength because it shows he can govern his own desires instead of being governed by them. The virtue of temperance also protects a man's dignity from gradual erosion. Each unanswered message or canceled plan chips away at self-respect when allowed to continue unchecked. Choosing to walk away halts that erosion before it becomes permanent damage. Seneca warned against small concessions that lead to larger losses of freedom. In romantic context, the small concessions are the extra texts, the adjusted plans, the waiting. Stopping them is the Stoic practice of drawing a firm line. The respect women feel arises precisely because the man refused to make those concessions indefinitely. They see someone who can enjoy connection without becoming enslaved to it. Practically, this means setting an internal standard in advance. Effort must be matched or the interaction ends. The standard is applied without anger or announcement. It is simply lived. As the man practices temperance, he discovers greater satisfaction in his own routines and goals. His conversations lose the undertone of seeking validation. Women notice the shift from eager pursuit to calm self-containment. That change alone elevates their regard because they are no longer dealing with a man whose emotional state depends on their replies. The respect is quiet but deep, rooted in observed discipline rather than dramatic gestures. Temperance also creates space for genuine mutual interest to appear or not. When pursuit stops, any re-engagement that follows comes from the other person's own initiative rather than from pressure. This removes the suspicion that interest was manufactured through persistence. Stoicism values what arises naturally from reason and virtue. A bond that begins after a man has walked away, therefore, carries a cleaner foundation. Women who return do so with clearer eyes and often with greater appreciation. The respect they bring is more authentic because it was not extracted through constant effort. Long-term, the practice of temperance and pursuit builds a reputation of measured strength. Friends and potential partners alike learn that this man does not overextend himself emotionally. That knowledge inspires a different level of treatment. In romantic contexts, it means future interactions start from a place of equality rather than from the imbalance of one person chasing. The original act of walking away becomes the reference point that keeps the dynamic healthier going forward. This outline demonstrates that walking away is an exercise in the ancient virtue of temperance applied directly to modern relationships. The respect women secretly hold is the recognition of a man who governs himself rather than allowing desire to govern him. Number 8. Walking away restores your natural masculine frame. In any interaction, a man's frame, his internal sense of reality and standards, determines how others relate to him. When he keeps pursuing despite low or no reciprocity, he hands that frame over to the other person. Stoicism calls this a loss of reason's proper rule. Walking away is the act of taking the frame back and re-establishing it on his own terms. The restoration is not loud or confrontational. It happens through consistent behavior that prioritizes his own principles over external approval. Women feel the return of this frame as a shift in the power dynamic that commands respect without demanding it. The restored frame shows in small but unmistakable ways. Plans are made on a schedule or not at all. Conversations stay light because they are no longer carrying the weight of proving worth. Presence becomes more relaxed because validation is no longer being sought. These changes are subtle yet powerful. Stoic philosophy teaches that we control our own impressions and actions. By living that teaching, the man stops shaping himself around someone else's responses. The result is a natural authority that was diluted when he was constantly adjusting to keep the connection alive. Practically, the restoration begins the moment further chasing stops. The man returns to his own routines, values, and goals without apology. Over days and weeks, the internal alignment becomes visible externally. He speaks with more certainty, listens without over-accommodating, and ends interactions when they no longer serve a good purpose. Women who once experienced him as flexible to the point of weakness now encounter someone who holds his ground naturally. The respect that emerges is the human response to a man who has remembered his own center. This restored masculine frame also protects against manipulation, whether intentional or not. Mixed signals lose their power when a man no longer invests mental energy in interpreting them. Stoicism emphasizes living according to nature and reason rather than according to fluctuating emotions. Walking away is the practical application of that emphasis. It clears the fog and returns the man to clear judgment. Women sense the clarity and respond with greater seriousness because they recognize they are dealing with someone whose reality is not easily shaken. In a longer view, the man who consistently reclaims his frame across relationships develops a stable character that attracts higher quality connections. He no longer appears as someone who can be managed through withholding attention. He appears as someone who manages himself first. The secret respect women feel is often the first acknowledgement of this stable frame. It opens the door to bonds where both parties operate from strength rather than from one person constantly trying to replace. This outline shows that walking away is the quiet restoration of a man's proper frame. The respect that follows is simply the acknowledgement that he has stopped surrendering what should never have been given away. Number 9. The freedom that comes from needing nothing from her. Stoic freedom is defined as needing nothing that can be taken away by others. When a man walks away from a situation that requires him to keep earning basic attention, he moves closer to that freedom. He stops needing her replies, her validation, or her consistent presence to feel steady. This detachment is not indifference or bitterness. It is the rational acceptance that his inner peace cannot depend on another person's choices. Women notice the freedom because the man's demeanor changes from subtly anxious pursuit to calm self-sufficiency. That self-sufficiency carries a quiet power that inspires respect. The freedom gained is deeply practical. Mornings are no longer started with checking for messages. Evenings are not spent replaying conversations or planning the next attempt to reconnect. The mental space that opens up is redirected toward things that actually build good life. Epictetus taught that we are disturbed not by things, but by our opinions about them. By changing his opinion from, "I need this connection," to "I am complete without it," the man removes the disturbance entirely. The resulting calm is visible and attractive in its own right. In daily practice, this freedom looks like engaging when it feels right and disengaging completely when it does not. No lingering hope, no backup plans, no emotional reserve held in case she changes her mind. The clean release allows the man to experience genuine lightness. Women who previously held the power of his attention now see that power has been withdrawn. The withdrawal forces them to confront the reality that his interest was never guaranteed. Respect arises as they recognize a man who has placed his well-being entirely in his own hands. This state of needing nothing also prevents the common cycle of idealization and disappointment. Without the need to keep the connection alive, the man can see the situation more clearly for what it is. Stoicism encourages objective judgment free from desire. Walking away enforces that objectivity. The clearer view strengthens the man's character and prevents him from wasting further life on what was never substantial. Women sense the clarity and often respond with a new level of regard because they are no longer interacting with someone whose judgment is clouded by attachment. Over time, the freedom compounds into a life where romantic interest is an addition rather than a necessity. The man can enjoy connection when it is mutual and healthy, yet he remains untouched when it is not. This balanced approach is rare and therefore respected. Women who encounter this version of the man often feel drawn to the stability he represents. The secret respect is the recognition that he has achieved something many strive for but few attain: true emotional independence. This outline reveals that walking away is the pathway to Stoic freedom in relationships. The respect women feel is the natural tribute to a man who has learned to need nothing from them and is therefore free to offer everything from strength. Number 10. Walking away as the highest form of self-mastery. Self-mastery is the Stoic ideal that places reason in command over desires, fears, and external circumstances. In the context of unbalanced relationships, walking away is one of the purest expressions of that mastery. The man masters the impulse to chase, the fear of being alone, and the desire for validation all at once. He chooses the harder but nobler path of aligning his actions with his principles rather than with his momentary feelings. This mastery does not announce itself. It simply shows in the calm decision to stop and the steady life that follows. Women perceive it as a form of quiet authority that sets him apart from men who remain at the mercy of their emotions. The path to self-mastery through walking away involves honest self-examination first. The man must admit when his persistence has crossed from virtuous effort into a rational attachment. Stoic journaling or evening review helps uncover these moments without self-deception. Once recognized, the decision to walk away becomes an act of courage and discipline. Each time it is practiced, the muscle of self-mastery grows stronger. The respect that develops in women is the acknowledgement of this growth. They see a man who is becoming more sovereign over himself with every difficult choice. Practically, self-mastery appears as the ability to feel the pull of desire or disappointment and still choose the action that preserves dignity. No dramatic exit, no bitter words, just consistent behavior that says, my standards will not bend. Over weeks, the man notices he reacts less to silence or rejection. His mood stabilizes because his sense of worth no longer fluctuates with another person's interest. This stability is deeply attractive because it signals a man who has done the inner work most avoid. Women respond with greater respect precisely because they sense they are in the presence of someone who rules himself. Long-term, this self-mastery extends far beyond romance. It influences how the man approaches work, health, friendships, and every challenge life presents. Stoicism teaches that the same principles apply everywhere. The man who has mastered walking away when necessary becomes someone who cannot be easily controlled or manipulated in any domain. That comprehensive strength is felt by everyone around him, including women who once saw only his willingness to pursue. The secret respect becomes part of a larger pattern of admiration for a life lived with deliberate command. In the end, walking away is revealed as far more than a relationship tactic. It is the training ground for the Stoic virtue of self-mastery in its highest form. The respect women hold is simply their recognition that they have witnessed a man choosing to rule himself rather than be ruled by circumstance or desire. That choice, practiced consistently, creates the kind of character that naturally earns deep and lasting regard.